Yeah, they're free roaming horses. Well, they're trying to change the designee, and I don't think it'll affect the wild horse is what I'm afraid of. But at least the Wild Horse of America group's talking about birth control, and something's got to change pretty quick.
All right, Mayor Crawford, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, you're live.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Winter Wonderland. It's the Village of Ruidoso. We're at the Village of Ruidoso, City of Ruidoso Downs Joint Use Board. It's February the 15th. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. And if we could get a roll call, please.
Chair Crawford,
Here.
Joey Jarvis,
Here.
Councilor Salas,
Here.
Councilor Jackson.
Here.
All right, and Mayor Holman is snowed in. So could I get a motion for the approval of today's agenda, please?
Mr. Chairman, move approval of the agenda as presented, and
Second.
giving the chair the ability to move items around for discussion as needs must.
Second.
Second, any discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilor Jackson,
Aye.
Joey Jarvis,
Aye.
Councilor Salas.
Aye.
And does the chair, and Chair
Yeah, I get to
Crawford.
vote. This is the only time I get to vote
Chair
almost.
Crawford.
Aye.
Okay.
Is there anyone from Souder Miller that's online?
Yes, Dale Lyons.
Oh, Dale, okay, we'll go to him since they get paid, and Russ doesn't. So we'll go, regular item number 1 is discussion and possible action on approval of minutes for regular meeting of December 21st, 2022. Hopefully everybody got a chance to read over those. Can I get a motion?
Mr. Chairman, move to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
Okay, roll call, please, ma'am.
Councilor Jackson.
Aye.
Joey Jarvis.
Aye.
Councilor Salas.
Aye.
Chair Crawford.
Aye. Item number 2 is the monthly report on the regional wastewater treatment plant. And then you'll be here for Russ Gillette's presentation afterwards.
Yes, sir. You want me to go over it?
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Mayor,
Good morning.
councilors, how are you guys doing today?
We're excellent.
It was a challenge trying to get in here. That's
I
what was going
imagine.
on, But it was cool, kind of fun. So the plant has been running good. You know, I tell people I love the snow because the snow means more water, fills up our reservoirs. And
Yes.
snow, that's what the mountains are all about.
You get to play dodgeball with other cars. I mean, it's,
There was some people sliding. But, no, the plant ran good, last month. No complaints. Our flows were pretty comparable, 1.68 for the month of January. So, I mean, we do have, some people in town. We are experiencing some skiers coming up and tourists, but as far as the plant goes, we did meet our 99% removal, so we're doing good there. We did take some fog last month, and the end of the mountain gods was 18.1, so they were below 20, which is good. Palmer Loop, unfortunately, was above 30. They were 30.1. They just go up and down. You just never know. They might have had people, they might have thrown more grease down the drain than normal. You just never know what happens over there. Our metering station, we got 34.5. And at the plant was 23.1. So, other than that, let me see. I know the cord looked a lot better, so that's a good sign. You guys are doing a good job over there. So actually, the court did come up with a negative number, which I know it looks funky, but at that particular time moment, when we did get that sample, it probably was low, because the results don't lie. And those are graph samples. The only true way to really do it would be to put a sampler out in the field with a hose kicking in it and doing a 24-hour composite, just to get that. But other than that, we are good. We did meet nitrogen and phosphorus last month, and that's all I have for this morning, unless you guys have any questions.
I don't have any questions. Does anyone?
None for me.
Okay.
And just to let you guys know, we are gearing up for our filter clean, so that's gonna happen within the next month.
Okay.
How long will that process be?
2 to 4 weeks,
Okay,
depending on how quickly, and
Right.
we gotta take our time, because it is a dangerous process.
yeah, it is, so,
We're trying to get things situated beforehand, 100% before we jump into it.
right, good. Good planning.
Any questions?
No, did
Thank you very
good.
much.
Thank you very much. Hang around. You're going to get to hear about the solar project, and then we'll have one on biogas. Dale Lyon, Sauter Miller, good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
We have a bad echo. Do you have two items on, a phone and a computer?
Hold on one second. No, I don't. Hold on. You have an echo now?
It's still an echo.
Turn the TV off there, Yvonne.
Maybe it's on our end. We're looking.
The speakers.
The speaker.
You have the audio on that should be down to 0.
Okay, now try it, Dale.
Can you hear me okay now?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Right. Good morning, Chair Crawford and members of the board. I trust you guys are getting a decent amount of snow, just like I did this morning and yesterday. So let me share my screen here.
Vaughn, can you turn the volume up?
I think he has to.
Can you speak louder or maybe turn your volume up? Dale, ours is wide open and we can hear you, but not great.
Okay, great. Yeah. Can you all see my screen now?
Yeah, I can see you. I just can't hardly hear you.
Okay. Let me see what I can do about the audio settings. Can you all hear me now?
Is that better for
A
everybody?
little bit better.
Okay.
There, we can hear you good now.
Okay. All right. So thank you for your time this morning. All right. So I wanted to give you all an update about the planned regional wastewater treatment plant solar project, and there's a question I'd like to pose to you about the direction of the project, but let me sort of lay out the groundwork first. So just to remind you all, Sauter Miller and Associates completed a feasibility study looking at the potential for ground-mounted solar and roof-mounted solar at the regional wastewater treatment plant on November 11th of 2011, and we recommended that the village apply for EPA Clean Water State Revolving Fund money for project development. And the feasibility work that we did concluded that the ideal size for a net metered solar project to offset basically all your electric usage at 2 primary electric consuming meters at the entrance works and the MBR building of the wastewater treatment plant would be about 1.5 megawatts. So we helped the village with the funding application, and the New Mexico Environment Department Construction Programs Bureau offered the village funding in the amount of 4.8, almost 4.9 million for project development at 0.01% interest. That was in May of last year, and the concept of building as much as 1.5 megawatts of solar, which the requested and awarded funding amount would cover, really hinged on the acquisition of adjacent land. And in fact, the funding request and award did include funding for land acquisition based on the appraised value. Unfortunately, the village was unable to negotiate acquisition of land with the adjacent landowners, the Williams and the Allisons.
What happened on that? I haven't heard one thing about that.
I didn't think
Okay.
we got it either.
Dale, I thought we already, but we did get the appraisal. I thought you said we had spoken to them already. This is Ron.
Yeah. No, this is the irrigated land that had water rights attached to it that I'm speaking of now. That is directly south. That is the principal property that the village was interested in. It sort of makes the most sense for the larger project development. Let me show you on a map here.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that one. I just knew that we had
No.
the one piece of property that we was appraised. That's the only one I was aware of. I wasn't aware of the other property.
Yes, there was an earlier appraisal of this parcel right here that's owned by the Williams.
Do you have a cursor on it or something? I don't know what piece you're talking about. I just see.
Do you see my screen? Oh, sorry. It's this.
Right there, okay.
Yep, sorry, I was looking at the wrong screen. So yes, this is the irrigated land that has water rights owned by the Williams brothers, Williams family. They were only interested in a long-term lease, which would have, the amount that they were requesting on an annual lease was pretty exorbitant. And it didn't make sense, and they weren't willing to sell the property. So, and then likewise for the Allison property, which was further to the east, they weren't interested in discussing sale of property. So anyways, let me back up. So those parcels, the village was unable to negotiate acquisition for the larger project, but there is some non-irrigated private land also owned by the Williams directly to the west of the project, just abutting the fence line, that would be available. It's not perfectly flat. It is a hill slope, but you could fit some additional solar on it. And because it's non-irrigated, doesn't have water rights, it's far cheaper. It's about it's 10 times less, in fact, than on a per acre basis than the appraised value for the irrigated land. So developing the downside of developing project, part of the solar project outside the existing water treatment plant boundary is that there will be required some additional studies and environmental compliance attendant to the federal funding source. So I just wanted to walk you through the pluses and minuses of considering whether to expand the project by a relatively modest amount to land outside, additional land outside the wastewater treatment plant boundary. And then we can talk about next steps under either scenario of just keeping it within the treatment plant boundary or expanding it beyond. Okay, so back to this figure. So this shows the approximate areas that are available that would be suitable for solar within the treatment plant boundary, these blue highlighted areas totaling about 1.9 acres. There's some future expansion and upgrades that are planned for the wastewater treatment plant, and we coordinated with the village's engineer at Moles and Corbin to identify what areas are still available, considering all these future plans for the wastewater treatment plant. There was a time when we were considering, as part of the project cost, removing these settling basins here, but it turns out they are apparently useful to the operations of the plant occasionally, and as a contingency to hold additional wastewater prior to treatment, or in some part of the treatment. So the operators wanted to hold on to those and not utilize this area. So that's our area that we have to work with inside the fenced treatment plant boundary. We have looked at.
Dale,
areas-
Dale, let me
Yes.
pause you for a minute there. This is Rifle Salas, Ruidoso Counselor. I guess this question's more for you, Isaac. On that far west side stretch of that 1.7 or 0.17 acre on the west side, that long one, doesn't our main go right through those?
No, it goes on the bottom.
On the very bottom?
Directly below it. Right there on the 1.7, it starts to slope upwards.
Okay. I couldn't remember where the main
Yeah,
was.
yes, sir, it's on the bottom left is where the.
Yeah, this
Right
where
there.
the cursor is right now is I believe, where the lift station is.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Dale, this is Ron. Can you, on that property that was appraised, could you show us exactly where that piece of property is at? And how many acres was that?
This is the most current smaller acreage directly to the west that you're referring to, Ron?
Yes, the one that
Yeah,
Eric
okay.
had appraised.
Yep, I will, yeah, that's in the upcoming slide.
Okay.
All right. So within the treatment plant boundary, this is a approximate layout of a 700 kilowatt ground mounted net metered system that will likely be split between the two electric meters, one with the MBR building, the other one with the inlet works. And so that's about, and you could fit, some additional rooftop capacity on top of this other portion of the MBR roof here, and you might be able to fit some additional solar in here. So, maybe the system total will get up to 800. And there's been some advances in efficiencies in panels and wattage capacity, so it's possible we could get closer to 800 within the treatment plant boundary. But all that will be borne out once we start getting proposals under the design build procurement that is planned. So this, as Ron referred to and as I discussed earlier, is this adjacent piece of land also owned by the Williams that doesn't have water rights that they are willing to sell. And the appraised value for this is $2,500 per acre. We had the appraiser kind of look at this larger area here, and that's the per acre amount that they came up with, $2,500 per acre. So what you can fit on that, what I'll show you here is that same parcel that identifies there's a drainage, and it's even got some little check dams across the drainage, sort of separating the wastewater treatment plant fence line and this parcel over here. We're dividing it, and then this line here just describes the slope of this acreage. It starts out relatively gentle and then gets steeper towards the toe of the slope right above this access road right here. But generally it is facing, the aspect of this slope is facing south, which is preferable for solar. So the layout of solar on this area, acknowledging that you wouldn't be able to put a solar array right up close to the fence because there is that drainage. So you could potentially fit about 200, maybe 250 kilowatts of solar on this adjacent piece of land. So if you looked at sort of the base case, the financial metrics, performance metrics, comparison between the 700 and 900 kilowatt system, which of course the latter case would be the addition of the additional solar, about 200 kilowatts of solar capacity outside the fence on an adjacent property that the village would conceivably buy, with the 700 kilowatts inside the existing fence boundary of the wastewater treatment plant. So on the left here is the financial metrics and performance metrics for the 700 kilowatt system, a combined system. And then on the right would be the 900 kilowatts. So the sort of standout metrics here is that you can save about an additional $40,000 a year if you were to expand the system. So that's about an increase in 27% savings annually in terms of reducing your electric utility bill. And also a approximately $500,000 cost increase in the overall project cost. Your payback period would be, essentially the same. And then net present value, which takes into account all the project expenses and savings over time, over the life of the project, in this analysis, 25 years, the net present value is about $200,000 more for the larger project cost, for the larger project, the 900 kilowatts. Does anybody have any questions about this comparison?
No, I don't.
Okay, so looking at the cash flow between the two different project sizes, you can see, what I'm assuming here is that the village will be paying back the loan for 20 years at effectively 0% interest, and then after the loan is paid off, then of course your savings goes up significantly. But it doesn't. So it's your overall cash flow on an annual basis is $30,000 or about $40,000 higher. But other than that, there's not a huge difference in the cash flow. And this is a comparison of the load offset. So the the gray bars on a monthly average basis is the electric usage for the wastewater treatment plant, and the blue bars represent the amount of energy that you're offsetting with the two different solar system sizes. So obviously the larger system is offsetting more of your electric consumption. So in terms of next steps, so I'm just going to lay out, what the workflow would be under the two different scenarios. So if you were to limit the PD project to within the existing regional wastewater treatment plant boundary, the next steps would be to complete and submit the NMED's Construction Program Bureau National Environmental Policy Act categorical exclusion request. And in discussion with the Construction Program Bureau staff, they've already indicated that under this scenario, they would consider the project that's already built within, that is limited to within the existing wastewater treatment plant boundary to be ancillary, and it would not require additional environmental review, and therefore it would be eligible for a categorical exclusion. So you wouldn't have to put together any additional environmental studies or prepare an environmental assessment. So then the next step would be, once they basically issue their acknowledgement that it's eligible for a categorical exclusion, we could actually prepare the design build procurement documents and then let that to select and hire the solar developer. There's contracting of the solar developer that we would be able to help facilitate build, and then the solar developer could submit the interconnection application to Otero County, and then project construction can begin as early as this spring. And then finally, project commissioning and interconnection. So under the second scenario, if you were to include a land acquisition and then purchase of land acquisition and then developing part of the solar system outside the existing wastewater treatment boundary, the Construction Programs Bureau has already indicated that the project it would not be eligible for a categorical exclusion because it would involve, because it would not involve construction of a new minor ancillary facilities adjacent to or on the same property. So they sort of view this as a significant project expansion, and it's not just the system size, but it's that the project would involve essentially developing new property, new land that is previously relatively undisturbed. So if that was the case and the village wanted to proceed that way, in order to have the solar system be a little bit bigger and provide some additional financial benefit, an environmental information document would need to be prepared, and which would involve some new analyses, including biological, wetlands, cultural resource assessments, and some time for consultation with the agencies. So that cost for all that, for the environmental information document and the studies would be approximately $20,000 and would take about 6 months. Many of the studies can be wrapped up pretty quickly, but it's the consultation that tends to take several months to complete. So the village acquisition would need to happen of the 1.5 acres of land. And as I mentioned, the appraised value is $2,500 per acre. And then once the environmental information document is approved by the Construction Programs Bureau, then the project can proceed to procurement and then interconnection, application, and construction and project commissioning. So, excuse me. So those are the two potential pathways the project can proceed. And with that, I will just stand for questions. And what I'm looking for is to just sort of continue the conversation with you all, answer any additional questions, and get your direction about which way you want to proceed.
Does anyone have any comments?
Oh, I had a question, Mr. Chairman. Dale, this is Jackson, counselor with the village. As I looked at the two overlays, was it your thought that we could use the existing roof of the current wastewater treatment plant for additional solar panels, number one? Number two, will it sustain that, and is there structural integrity that will allow that?
Sorry, which area are you referring to? I think you said the road.
I'm sorry?
Which area are you referring to?
Oh, on your overlay areas within the wastewater treatment plant boundary for solar PV development?
Yeah, right.
And and you've got it blued in. It looks to me like on the roof of the current plant. Is that not correct?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't hear. Yeah, so the roof of the MBR building. Yes, that would, part of our work would be to do a structural analysis of that roof, but, based on the input we've already received from a solar developer, looking at the roof, they don't see any problems with it. It's a relatively modern building, and so it'd be sort of a surprise that it wasn't able to support the weight of a ballasted roof-mounted solar system.
Thank you. The other question I had was when you look at the 700 kW versus the 900 kW in terms of the implementation and placement of the solar panels, is that divided, and the thought on that only if we included the additional out-of-boundary 5 acres?
Sorry, the 5 acres would have allowed the village to develop, up to 1.5 megawatts.
Oh,
right?
okay.
And that would have essentially, generated enough solar to almost completely offset your annual electric usage
Thank you.
at the solar system. And so with the smaller system options, obviously you still get a very substantial financial benefit. You're saving between 150 or 100 and almost $190,000 a year in year one with these solar systems, and you're taking that off of an electric bill that doesn't include taxes and other fees. That's close to $450,000 per year.
Yeah, go right ahead, because my brain's spinning around because I'm still lost on the property deal.
Me too.
So
We have Chrisella that's going to ask a question here. Dale.
Okay.
Hi, Dale. I was looking at your two options, and when you talked about the additional environmental assessment that has to occur if we do get the 1.5 acres, was that already included in the initial projections? Because we were looking at the 5 acres when we designed the project, or is this going to be completely outside of what we already projected as the cost for the project?
Yeah, no, the budget would definitely cover the cost of the additional environmental information document preparation and any studies that would need to be done. The only caveat with that is that our Sauter Miller and Associates work on behalf of the village to help manage this project and shepherd it along is not covered by the funding award, because in order for the village to have project management costs covered by the grant, the village would need to do a competitive procurement following the funding program guidelines to hire a consultant to do that. And it was the village's decision to actually hire Sauter Miller and Associates on a time and materials basis prior to even receiving the funding award to help get through the project development.
Well, yeah, basically, you're the expert that was going to lead us through this quagmire that we've been talking about for 10 years and give us a direction to go. And that's what you guys were hired to do, unless I'm totally off base.
No, that's right.
Yeah, and so then when we get to a point, but I'm still not clear if the debt servicing and the overall operation of it would be better considered with the 5 acres, or if we're looking just at the 700 or 900. And then, just what's the payback? I see that, on a monthly basis, are we netting to the good, or is it going to be a loss every month until the thing's paid off?
Right. So again, the 5 acres is off the table. The neighbors, either the Williams or the Allisons, neither of those.
Okay, you're talking about the acre and a half, the $3,700 or whatever, $2,500.
That's right.
That portion of it is still on the table.
Yes, sir. And in terms of cash flow, the project is cash positive in year one.
Okay.
Right. So the debt service, your annual loan payment on the project cost that is close to between 1.7 and 2.2 million. That's the very last metric there at the bottom of each table, that's the cost of the total cost of development for either system, the 700 or 900 kilowatts. So your loan payment is going to be less than the amount that you save every year. The amount that you spend on the loan is going to be less than what you save in your electric utility bill costs. So that means that you're cash positive in year one. You're cash positive in, throughout the life of the project. In either scenario, either going with a 700 kilowatt or a 900 kilowatt system. So the point that I was trying to make earlier was just that it's certainly within the village's power to hire a consultant to do the separate NEPA environmental assessment and prepare the environmental information document and have that cost borne by the grant award. Sauter Miller and Associates can do that also, but anyways, under our current contract that was just made directly between the village and my firm, that was a sole source contract, time and materials contract. If the village wanted to direct us to prepare the environmental information document, because we were hired not under the federal procurement guidelines for the per the grant funding program, then our cost to do the environmental work couldn't be paid for out of the grant. Is that clear?
So what you're saying, Dale, is when we initially looked at the 5 acres, there was even a component for an environmental assessment included?
Yeah, I mean, the environmental assessment cost is, it's pretty minor compared to the overall project or overall property acquisition cost that you were looking at.
Yeah, but it just seems to me that you said that it wasn't included as part of the contract with you guys to do the environmental assessment, but was that an assumption that was made on the 5 acres as well, that we would find a separate company to do that part of it?
That's totally up to you. You could do it either way. All I'm pointing out is that if you want the grant to cover the project costs associated,
We have to go out for bid.
That's right.
Okay.
And it also has to be, like the procurement documents have to include all the federal requirements spelled out, all the federal wage requirements, and a lot of pro forma, statements from the funding program. It's not impossible. It doesn't take forever.
Dale, I guess our question is, whenever we had the time and materials contract with Sauter Miller, was that not included doing the environmental assessment as part of that contract, the original one?
We absolutely can do that, and I think we have enough budget to at least get most of the way through that, if that's what you guys choose to do.
Hey Dale, this is Zach Cook, the village attorney. Can you talk a little bit about the derating period of these panels?
You mean like their loss in performance?
Yeah.
Every year? Okay, so they lose about 0.05% of their production every year. And so, it's measurable, but it's not significant.
What about after 10 years?
It's the same rate per year.
Okay.
Over the life of, the panels last probably about 30 years. The inverters will last probably about 10 years.
Okay.
So part of your electric utility bill savings every year should, be set aside to put into a fund that you can use to replace inverters.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing I'll point out is that, the planned PV array is a ground-mounted fixed tilt system, except for the ballasted roof-mounted systems on the roof of the MBR building. So there's no moving parts for these racking systems that support the PV panels above the ground. So there's nothing to maintain or break. There's no need really to wash the panels. Just rainfall and snow is enough to clear dust off the panels that might collect on them.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions? No?
No, I don't.
So at this point, you want us to discuss this deal at another time and decide what we want to do if we want to move on with the project, and then look at some of the information because of the 10-year, just some of the material. It's starting to sound like our water project, that these things become obsolete and then we have to reinvest. And I don't know, I'm just not as excited about it as I once was. Wasn't what I expected to hear. I thought we were going to find out that this was a good deal that we've been looking at for all these years, and that we finally, technology had got here. We had a funding source.
So
It just sounds like it's
I'm not sure if we're getting our signals mixed here. I think what I'm saying is that the funding source will absolutely pay for the project. You do need to do a federal procurement to hire the solar developer, right? So the bulk of the project cost, 99.9% of the project cost will be paid under, very favorable loan terms to develop the project. And once the project is built, you'll be saving piles of money every year on your electric utility bill.
Well, just simple math, is that like 90 grand a year? By the time you take out what the payback, what the generated is, and you get down to, let's say, the 700 kilowatt, you're looking at $149,000. And if there was another number in there somewhere on savings that was added up to about 80,000 or 90,000, so you do the math on it, is that the net number that we would save every year? 80 to 90,000 a year?
No, the net savings.
Well, I'm talking about making a payment too. Out of the 149, that the payment's taken out of that?
Right. So that number is accounted for here under net present value. So the amount of savings plus all the project costs to develop the project, again, this is essentially free money or zero interest money in the form of a loan.
Well, it's payback when it's a loan, so
Right,
I'm just saying how we debt service it off of the electricity that we're generating ourselves, that we're not paying to the electric company.
That's right. But the net present value basically accounts for all project costs and benefits, and you will save over 25 years $1 million under, with the smaller 700 kilowatt system, and with the larger system, you'll save approximately 1.2 million. Okay, and then this is your cash flow. So this incorporates both your annual electric bill savings and your loan payments. And so you're saving annually about $40,000 a year. Or I'm sorry, you're to the positive $40,000 a year based on what you're currently paying for your electric bill. And that number grows over time because the cost of electricity goes up, right? And with the larger system, you're saving about, what looks like $45,000 a year over what you're currently paying for your electric bill. And this, again, incorporates and accounts for your loan payment.
Okay. Anyone?
Dale, I had another question on the property. Was the original project based on the 5 acres, having that additional 5 acres in order to build out?
No, we looked at the feasibility of developing solar within the existing wastewater treatment plant, and then also a larger project that could be placed on adjacent property.
Was there any additional property around there? I know there were some that you said they weren't willing to sell, but next to the 1.5 acre, is there any additional property there?
No, there really isn't. That, I mean, the other thing is that you need to have land that's relatively close, right, to the electric meters that you're going to be offsetting your electric usage at. So it doesn't make sense to develop solar, an eighth of a mile away, where a neighbor might be willing to sell, and then running the generated power in a line back to the wastewater treatment plant. And that's, you're looking at, a much larger, longer project that's, like from an environmental review standpoint, could be very complicated too.
Okay, what do y'all want to do? Jackson, you got any ideas?
I'm sorry, it's still going back to the replacement of the panels. If it's a 10-year
On the regulators.
lifespan, yes.
On the regulators.
Regulator.
Regulators
30 on
and
the
stuff.
panels.
The inverters.
The
Inverters,
inverters,
yeah, inverters.
yes.
Yeah,
And
that's
what's
right.
the
So the-
cost of that?
For a string inverter, maybe $5,000. They're not very expensive to replace, and they certainly can last longer than 10 years. It's just you need to budget some money to pay for replacing inverters over the life of the project. They can go out. They can last 30 years, right? But some of them
Right.
won't
I
last.
understand that, and that's what we learned with our filter system and stuff like that, that they say, yeah, these will last for a while. Next thing we know, in 2 years, we're having to change them out or something like that. So that's what's stumping me, Mayor, is our investment, even though it's all grant and paid for, really benefiting the operations of the plant? And I know it's saving on electricity up front and through the years and stuff, but I'm just concerned if all of a sudden, same thing, like with our HVAC systems in our new buildings. We get them so they're energy efficient and running there, but then 2 months later, they don't work efficiently. And we're ending up having to replace parts, replace condenser, whatever it is that they do. That's my concern.
And the water meters,
And the water meters I'm just seeing this too much to think of putting all on this.
So how many inverters would this system have? Do you have a ballpark if we did the 700 or even the 900 kilowatt?
Maybe 5 or 6.
Oh, 5 or 6. It's not per panel?
Yeah. No, absolutely not.
Okay, well,
No,
see, you're
they-
talking to
they-
people that don't
they
know,
make-
come here from
Right,
Sikkim,
right.
and that's what I'm
Well, they
expecting
do
you to walk me
make,
through it, and I'm not getting through
They do
it.
make micro inverters, which basically on the back of each module there's a very small inverter, but those aren't as reliable as string inverters, which basically collect the energy coming from a whole string of PV modules. So that's the way this would go. There would just be a handful of them for the entire project, and all this stuff is warrantied. The panels have 20 to 25 year warranties. The inverters are warrantied for 10 to 15 years sometimes.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, and it's all it's all relatively solid state equipment. This isn't experimental. This is the very most basic PV system you can get. There's no moving parts. As I described earlier, the racking system is fixed tilt. So it's really relatively maintenance free. I think that this,
Well, and I can tell you that system over by Carrizozo, they said, once they got it up and done everything, that they don't do anything with it.
yeah,
It's just there. And so, we've been looking at this so long that maybe I'm just getting fatigued over it. But I think that with the warranty issue, that changes everything, because, we get into these, well, they're obsolete. Well, it's not a warranty issue. they're just obsolete. So that doesn't, it's a new one. But with these inverters, I don't know that there would be something that the technology would change so much that we wouldn't be able to use them, or if we would even be able to get that same one.
Yeah, no, the inverters aren't anything special. There's lots of different inverter manufacturers, and you don't, the PV modules aren't made specific for specific inverters. It's only, you could replace an inverter with a different manufacturer make, as long as it had the same capacity. So that's not a problem. And, I guess, the wastewater treatment plant is going to stay where it's at for the foreseeable future. And if, 30 years down the road, you want to replace your older older PV panels with some newer ones, they'll be, much more efficient panels in the future. So potentially you'll be able to replace your older modules in 30 years or so with much more higher capacity ones, and so you can basically expand the system capacity, the solar system capacity, using the same racking system, because your racking system, you can just unbolt panels and put new panels on.
Okay, and I know that with where the government's going on fossil fuels, natural gas, we've been talking to our P&M folks,
Yeah.
and they say just better take a deep seat and a faraway look. It's getting ready to really go.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the savings will be really much more than what we even think if.
5 years down the road.
Yeah, because of what they're saying is going to happen when we go to all electric.
And even if we put in an accrual account to cover the inverters, which seem to be the major item, we would have that money readily available.
Well, and we do right now with what we've got in savings that we do for plant.
Right.
I don't see Judy, but that we would just have to build that in.
Right. So, by the way, this cash flow comparison does include, plan, like putting money into a reserve account and replacing inverters over time, and that assumes that maybe one of your 6 inverters goes out every 10 to 15 years.
So the 900 kilowatt would include the acre and a half if we were to purchase it.
What
That's
do we do
right.
on natural disasters on this, like hailstorms? How do these hold up?
I don't know.
Is this something that we're gonna have to insure and, because we get, hailstorms quite frequently and destroys a lot of stuff we have, so.
And wind.
I could see a
Yeah, no,
big hailstorm
they're
coming through.
rated for, I can get you the data, but they're rated for hail impacts that are, much, stronger than, they're much stronger than, say, the hood of a car. So they can withstand, significant hail impact with no damage. And in terms of wind, it's a fixed tilt system and it's up against a hill slope there. You're not on a ridge line, but of course, they're designed to withstand significant winds. The racking system, which is built out of galvanized steel, is it's either anchored or it's driven into the soil several feet. And so the entire system can't just lift off the ground.
Dale, I think this is Jackson, and I think our concern is that on this mountain, we often have, more recent than in the past, gusts up to 70 miles an hour. So that's our concern.
And it's in a canyon that funnels it towards us,
Yes.
Okay, so you want to move forward to look at the land purchase of 1.5, the 700 kilowatt option, the 900, or go with the 700 kilowatt option, or shelve it? We're to that point.
Right. I would be in favor of what's been being presented with the warranty information, going ahead with the acquisition of the 1.5 acres and also going with the 900 kW system. The reason being is we haven't even touched on the cost of the escalating costs of installation, labor and materials. We might as well get the best that we can for now. And at least that's my personal opinion.
Well, and I agree with that.
That makes sense, yes.
Joey Jarvis, what do you think?
I agree with Dr. Jackson.
Ron?
I agree. We'll have Zach, we'll get with Bordy Williams and get that purchase agreement and get a copy of the appraisal. Did we have a copy of that appraisal? Because I wasn't part of that whole
No.
process on that, so I
I
was.
thought we were still working on the 5 acres and that we thought we had something going and then now it's the acre and a half, but we can certainly do that.
There was an appraisal done, but it was done, I think, on a larger tract, like maybe 10 acres. So I think that's how it was done, but we had talked about having an appraisal just on the smaller portion to see if Mr. Williams was willing to take that offer or not.
Okay. And then what we would need to do, once we do that purchase, we'd go out for an RFP for installation. And then, I don't know why we wouldn't include the environmental assessment in that portion.
Right. So just let's talk about timing then. So the appraisal is done, right, for this 1.5 acres. The appraiser looked at a larger area, but if you keep going west of the wastewater treatment plant, the slope gets steeper and there's pinyon juniper. It really isn't suitable for solar development. So the 1.5 acres is really, the area that would be most suitable for solar development that is not irrigated, right? So that appraisal is done. The village can negotiate the purchase of that property with Bordy Williams and his brother. And while that's happening, the environmental information document can also be prepared at the same time, and in advance of the procurement. And so once and I think even the procurement can even proceed as soon as the state provides their feedback on the environmental information document. So the state needs time to review the environmental report and make their decision, their determination, before they will approve the procurement can begin.
You tracking that, Ron?
Yes, Mayor Crawford, members of the JUB board will have to do the environmental assessment, and at that time, once they give us authorization to move forward, and then we would procure for doing the build out and also it'll be a design build type project.
Right.
But we need to get we need to move forward and get the property purchased and negotiate. I mean, it's 2,500 is that's the appraised value. That's what we can offer, and we'll move forward on that.
Okay.
So just, if I may, I think it might make sense, to get Mr. Williams's, at least agreement in principle to sell his property, but I would make the sale, the final sale of that document contingent on the state's approval.
Yeah.
Yes, correct.
Of the environmental information and that aspect of the project. You wouldn't want to just buy the property and then they, for some reason, I don't anticipate, for some reason, not approve the project to proceed. And so I think you wanted to proceed with purchasing the additional acreage. You wanted the funding program to pay for the additional cost associated with the environmental work. You would have two procurements. One would be to hire a consultant to do the environmental work, and then a second one to hire the solar developer. The other option, of course, as I described, is that we, Sutter Miller, under our existing contract, we can actually just begin the environmental assessment, but of course that would not be covered by the grant.
Okay. Okay.
And Mayor Crawford, members of the board, she's the lead on this project, and so she'll be working on those and seeing who we're going to procure with to do the environmental assessment. There's several consultants that we currently work with that can do the environmental.
So what we'll do is we'll discuss it internally, decide if we're going to go with Solder Mill to do an EA or if we're going to go out for an EA.
Right.
Okay?
And I just had one logistical question. Which works more seamlessly? In-house or two different entities working side by side in terms of your environmental assessment?
Yeah, so if you're looking to, to get the project done as soon as possible, the fastest way to do it is just to have us prepare the environmental information document. We could have it, done in a few months and submitted to the state. If you were to do a federal procurement or village procurement following the federal program guidelines, that would be probably a 2-month process to get a consultant hired.
And if I'm following this, then there would be a 6-month estimated time even after that's done and once this is actually submitted.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's right.
I know this is a dumb question, but what if
No,
Williams,
Isaac, there are no dumb questions.
what if Williams doesn't agree to the 2,500 per acre? What if he wants more?
Well, we can't do it. We can only do what appraised is, but if they appraise 10 acres, it may not appraise for the same acre and a half. I don't know. So it'll be what the appraisal is. And then if we can't do that, then our other options is 700.
Yeah, the appraiser did specify that the appraised value was on a per acre basis. They did not, I don't believe, provide a total for the, they understood that the area was approximate. It was really just sort of an area of the Williams property that the village was potentially interested in, of non-irrigated land.
Okay.
And that was the price they came up with, $2,500 per acre.
Okay. All right. Well, then I guess we'll be in touch.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Dale.
Yep, thank you. You guys have a good afternoon.
You too. Okay. So we'll move on to the next option. The next item up on the agenda is a presentation on developing a biogas to energy infrastructure with Rush Gillette, and COS. What's COS stand for? Construction, LLC? Companies? COS is companies?
Yes, sir.
How's really? Learn something new every day.
Just cause.
Just cause. No, it's on or off and they control the volume, so.
Okay. Good morning, Mayor and JUB council members. I earlier presented to a few of you at an earlier meeting and just wanted to thank you for this opportunity to present again. Joining me by audio is Corey LeClaire, the Dean of the College of Engineering at New Mexico Tech. We recently began a food waste to energy feasibility study for a tech campus system that bears some similarities from biological oxygen demand and substrate analysis that we would do and perform under this proposed feasibility study.
Might need an adapter.
You got an adapter for,
Do you have this to see? HDMI to see? Okay. But while she's looking for that dongle to connect the HDMI to a USB-C, in the earlier presentation, there's a couple of things that the council and the mayor may want to consider in terms of procurement, and that is, it is not uncommon, or it is typical to have energy savings performance contracts, and that transfers a lot of those warranty issues or inverter issues or equipment issues, and what you're basically getting through that type of a contract is a savings. And whatever risks are part of the system are the developer of the equipment or the developer owner of that equipment. And that's one of the reasons I've proposed a 10-year build, operate, transfer type of agreement with this system, because it takes the operating risk and the amount of energy is going to be produced risk away from the buyer, and it puts it basically back onto the vendor or the developer.
okay.
And I think in systems like this, especially in the Ruidoso area where we've got, the wind, hail, dust, we all know it doesn't rain consistently throughout the year. It basically guarantees the village, the buyer, a savings. And what the analysis that the developer does is how much margin is there in the project. So it really causes the developer to be very intelligent about where the money is, what he's putting in, the terms under which he's putting in. But then from the buyer's perspective, it offers basically performance guarantee is what you're getting. So whatever warranties the equipment manufacturers provide, that goes to the developer. But it's his problem if there's a supply chain issue on inverters and they aren't available in 6 months. So he's got inventory for that contract.
Okay.
So just a thought. I hope, it's the method and the approach that we're going to take in our proposal to the village and the feasibility study so that it's a 10-year build, operate, transfer. So we build at risk, we operate at risk, and after, 3 to 4 years, we've got stable, production and stable energy production, stable biogas production.
Okay.
Does everyone has the slides for the presentation?
Yes,
So
we
I'll just-
do.
So I'll just work off of that.
Yeah, the presentation agenda starts with biosolids.
Yes, sir. Corey, are you there? I saw him earlier.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, thanks, Corey. So basically, and Isaac, I saw your analysis. What we're looking at, the highest methane content substrate is your hexane insoluble, which is, your fats, oils, and greases. That's going to have the richest methane content. After that, it's proteins and then carbohydrates. So the initial part of the feasibility study is looking at the content of the biosolids, the substrates that can be converted or convertible to biogas. The technology has been around for 40-plus years. Sweden operates public transportation buses off it, Germany as well. In the U.S., the majority of it is going into pipeline quality gas, interstate pipeline quality gas. SoCal Gas is probably the largest purchaser of that gas in the United States. There is available funding from the New Mexico Finance Authority for the feasibility studies. And I've just gone through procurement with New Mexico Tech, so I'm familiar with.
Do you have Bluetooth on your?
Sure.
Okay, if you'll turn that on, we can get you connected.
Okay. Village Hall guest?
Village Hall guest?
Yes.
Okay.
So I need to go to.
So the ultimate funding source is the same funding source that was part of the Solar Miller presentation earlier today, with the difference being that we would apply as a private entity. We've already spoke with Rhonda Holderman, Judy Kale there at the Environment Department, and there is that route now in the legislature. Our project with a very large biogas plant in Roswell and another very large project in the Clovis Portales area were instrumental 7 years ago getting through that, getting that change in the legislation at the time of the Governor Martinez administration. So that is another option for a private developer, especially under an energy savings performance contract. I think that would be an interesting approach to have Sodermiller look at and discuss with Rhonda at the Environment Department, because again, it's with newer systems and newer technologies or entities that aren't necessarily staffed at the present time for the introduction of these, I think it's prudent to basically transfer as much of the risk as you can contractually to the developer. So that after a period of time, you've got the data, you've got the savings, you've got the dollars in your account to prove up that approach, whether it's solar, biogas, what have you. It's not to say that these aren't integrated and these technologies aren't proven. They are, but for that reason, a ethical developer will be glad to prove it up.
Okay.
Yep. And in those terms, in terms of the finance terms, they're offered to the private entities as well. The wrinkle with the private funding is the private funder has to pledge or put aside capital equal to the amount of the capital in the project. So instead of a public entity pledging a portion of gross receipts for the repayment, the private person has to basically put up cash. But because of that, in my view, it's a great screen from those that know what they're doing and are willing to accept that risk from those that don't. Because if they're not willing to put up their own cash, in my view, what does that tell you about the proposal? They're not quite sure.
Sure, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, so are you going to go through a presentation of how this system works for the ones that weren't there the last time?
Okay. Typically, we install if you want to call it a scalping plant, basically a receipt or collection point prior to its entry into your facility. We use a couple of different technologies to separate the components in the stream that are most amenable to conversion to methane. And then the rest of the material goes on into your plant. There's a couple of different loops that we can have. We can have a loop where we're returning whatever moisture is in that material that we're collecting back to the plant, or we can dry that material and it ends up basically being a soil amendment fertilizer after digestion without the biological components or the chemical components of the original substrate. These systems operate at flow rates of 500,000 gallons today up to several million gallons per day of substrate. Typically, the solids are in concentrations of 8 to about 14%. We're basically adding into reactors at a rate of about 9 to 10% solids and retaining them for a period of time where they're digested. After that biosolid material is digested, you have a 58 to about 70% biogas, percentage methane content gas. That gas, with conditioning, because what you're looking at is the impurity, the hydrogen sulfide in particular, that's the corrosive. So you're removing your hydrogen sulfide, and basically you've got two gases left. You've got methane and carbon dioxide. With Professor LeClaire, we're looking at ways to use that CO2 to produce additional renewable natural gas. Wouldn't be necessarily part of this project, but it's something we're looking at actively.
So what would you do with that CO2? I mean, could you filter it off and then sell it to a CO2 company that provides food-grade CO2 for soda machines and all the ALSIPs and restaurants and all of that kind of stuff, or for a processing plant? Or?
It's the greater value is reacting that CO2 with hydrogen to produce more methane. So you produce more biofuel. Now, that biofuel at site is going to have a lot less cost in its utility than it would be if it's trucked or pipelined to another location. Pipelines work great when you're in an area like the Permian Basin where, there's a variety of gathering lines and a variety of CO2 lines, and the injection point isn't too far from your source of origin. In this instance, it would make, I believe, this would be subject to the feasibility study, but I believe it would make a lot more sense to basically see what could be added. What could be reacted at site and added back to the fuel cell that would be producing your energy. I think that would be the optimal route for that CO2.
So in the feasibility study, all these things would be taken into account?
We'd look at that, yeah. We'd cost it, similar to what the presentation this morning. We'd set up those metrics, what the estimated cost is for, the amount of CO2 we're talking about, the system, the reaction system that would be devised to react that amount of C2. And what you would see is basically a process like a block diagram in a presentation to give you a general idea of what is the process flow, what occurs at this step, and then what are the outputs and the estimated outputs. And again, the proposal that we would finally give is that we would, build, operate, and transfer for a 10-year period. So that's the perspective that I would take on this system and to structure it financially. And then we would take on the debt from the Environment Department, not the village.
Now, could that work in conjunction with the solar process that we're looking at?
I just don't know what the appetite is in solar right now for that type of a deal structure. One of the bigger challenges right now with solar is domestic production of PV panels, because the majority are coming from China.
There's very little, yeah.
The majority are coming from China, so you've got supply chain potential issues, other equipment that be foreign sourced.
Well, we're still waiting on vehicles that we ordered a year and a half ago, so we get all that, but this is basically in competition with the solar panel project, or it would be?
I think they could work great together. And one thing that I would, maybe at some point want to have a discussion with council and with the council's authorization with Dale is looking at basically balance energy on storage. So that, on days like today.
Wait, when the solar's not working today, the biofuel
Yes.
process would be storing in batteries to use so it would increase, hopefully, the energy that we're producing on site, and then less on. So on this feasibility study, I understand the process. Since we last spoke, I talked to some other stuff and looked a lot of stuff up online, and the science is there that these can work if you have enough material, like what you showed us on the whiteboard.
Right.
And that was the only real concern that I had, but it looks like that they're pretty durable once they're balanced and once they're operational and people understand it. There's some learning curve that they talked about, but you've taken some of that out with being the owner-operator risk taker.
Right.
And so that's some of the things that I noticed.
Right. As far as the energy producing device, that's typically Bloom Energy, and they've been doing it for several years now. They've got, several megawatts on large campuses, Apple, Facebook, Oracle, California. They've got some on academic campuses. Their unit is a 300 kW unit. That's their smallest unit. But we're looking at something much smaller for New Mexico Tech. With Blue Gen, it's solid oxide fuel cells coming out of Germany. So that's the other thing we're looking at. And when you go into a federal procurement contract, there are a lot of Buy American provisions.
Absolutely, there are.
So that's the other thing in terms of when we do the feasibility, we're not just looking at it from an engineering point of view, but also from equipment purchase and what, warranties are we receiving and who are receiving them from, and then where do we source to replace a unit.
Well, and that's things that we've learned, ones of us that have been around here for a long time, is we do all the studying, we do everything we could, we look at the presentations, we hire engineers to walk us through the deal, and we make a purchase, and then 5 years later, the cell phone company goes from 3G to 5G, and you got to upgrade everything. And by the way, we don't pay for that. And it's like, well, did they not see this coming? Should we have seen this coming?
Right.
And so these are issues that we're looking into when we're talking about these new technologies. How do we get them basically for free?
Right.
And then how do we get a benefit out of them?
Right.
And so I like that approach. But I wish that, she got you up now, so that you could go through the feasibility study where you talk about the anaerobic digestion and the biohydrogen and how you store it.
You got it? Okay. All right.
Oh, you got it over there?
Okay.
Okay.
Just tell me which slide you want me to go to.
Well, go ahead and start on your presentation, because you haven't, but we've been looking through them, learning about your company and
Okay.
The different things that you've done. But when you get to the feasibility study
Okay.
on the anaerobic digestion system,
Right.
and then going into biohydrogen and just how you're able to take it's not influent, what's it called? The stuff we're taking into the plant, and then how you take that as your feeder stock, and then how you're able to generate this.
Sure. So the feedstock has components in there They're already, present, and they're termed biosolids generally. But what they are chemically is, they're classified, as what as fats, oils, and greases, proteins, or carbohydrates. And each of these, components has a calorie value or a heat value, and that heat value is a function of the chemical bonds in that material. And what you see on the right side of that slide up here is some of the typical composition of biogas based on different substrates. So you've got, on that top slide there, you've got protein, carbohydrates at the top, protein, lipids, et cetera. And those values, that VS is the volatile solid portion. That is typically your hexane insoluble fraction that the plant's giving. I just took a quick look through the slides that Isaac presented earlier today.
Yes.
So that's typically telling you everything that's hexane insoluble. It doesn't tell you if it's a lipid or the kind of lipid it is, or whether it's a fat, oil, or grease, but that hexane insoluble is your general classification of a fat, oil, or a grease. Okay? And below that is basically different sources that are typically used at table 4 that are used for biogas production. And then that last chart on the bottom is showing you basically the difference between, cattle manure on the top left and food waste when you're next to the bottom. So you can see there's about a 6-fold increase in the biogas potential between a cattle manure and a food waste material.
And that's one of the aspects that they were talking about is food waste, and with our solid waste and where we're looking at rate studies and all those things, what it would take to be able to collect food waste from the school system, from the Inn of the Mountain Gods, from hotels, from restaurants, that we're able to add to this to generate these things, but also getting them out of our landfill and all the other things. And then the transportation that it adds to our solid, to our trucks. So there's a whole nother component of things that opened up to the possibilities.
Right. I think from a conceptual point of view in terms of the feasibility study, the first is the lower hanging fruit, so to speak. It's what's already being delivered to the plant.
Sure.
Because you don't have a transportation expense, you don't have operational complexity, on days like today, or if we have this weather for a few days, it's coming in, and we can design and engineer to what's coming in process. And as that gets online, something similar to what we're doing with New Mexico Tech, we could look at adding as an additional supply line into basically these reactors. But because it's in, these solids are in water, that's the form you want to have them in, ideally. So we could recirculate some of the water that we don't use in the process, or recovered from the process, to incorporate with that food waste. But basically, you want a ratio of about 9 parts of water to 1 part of solid. That's roughly the ratio you want. And we can do that by recycling the water that we receive, so that we're not, we don't require additional water. And eventually it's returned, into the system that goes into the wastewater treatment plant.
Isaac, are you following this?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Just my question would be, you'd have to have a substantial amount of land to put the process in, and then you'd always have a byproduct that you'd have to worry about, and just things like that.
Well, he was talking about vertical tanks.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So there's 2 different dimensions that you can incorporate in your design. The first is more of a vertical dimension, where it's basically mixed tank reactors. So you're basically just going, up. And then there's in-ground lagoons, which are HDPE line lagoons that are top and bottom. They have roughly a 25-year. They're using the oil field for, fracking fluids and variety. So they're pretty well proven in terms with, very strong corrosives and other chemicals. And they're improved by most state environment departments, so that, once you incorporate them in a groundwater monitoring well, which would probably be your own downstream well, it's very doable. And we have gone through the application process with the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and Rhonda at the Environment Department. So she's familiar with the designs and the environmental side of it. We've produced the NEPA because it was a new development. It was, greenfield, so we went in from the ground up and built up. I think just looking at what I've seen this morning, there's some areas, presently, inside the fence of the wastewater treatment plant that would be amenable to this. And just to give you an idea of scale for a 6,000 cow, 3,000 cow dairies that were co-located, we were able on 4 acres to put in the ground all the reactors, in-ground lagoon type reactors, steel tank reactors, and a processing plant on a little bit over 4 acres. So I think 2.5 acres would roughly be, in a location, would be workable.
Okay, and then he was talking about the waste that would come off of this process, what would it be?
That digestate basically has fertilizer value. So it can be added to, if you've got soil amendments or fertilizer off-takers.
Yeah, we have that where we make that available, and usually they'll take that, and then what's left we haul off.
The golf courses, there's several in the area.
Are we permitted to reuse that? Because I know in some cases you have to have that permitted to be able to take that waste product and then reintroduce it in.
They use that for bedding in the dairy industry, but I'd have to take a look at it. But I think if it's on public parks, places where people aren't growing food, I think it should be doable. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think when it's used as a vegetable gardening or that type of operation, I think you'd have to look at, what the limits are.
Because I know at the track we looked at being able to use horse manure to just put back on the property that's out there to green it up or whatever, and we were told we couldn't do it.
Right.
That it had to go through a process. And a lot of it may be because of the antibiotics and stuff they're
Yeah.
using, horse, which he said would kill this process, antibiotics.
Yeah.
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 So the next question, the science is sound. I've read up enough on that and seen it that it's moving in other areas of the country. So on a feasibility study, there's funding available that you've mentioned through that. I wonder how would it affect our funding through, was it DFA? What is the other one?
On the solar project, Mayor?
Yes,
That's through the New Mexico Environmental Department.
Environmental Department. If that would affect our ability there.
The intention is not to go through the village for debt funding.
So we wouldn't have any of that.
You wouldn't have an application for it. We'd have the application on behalf, and we'd enter into an energy performance agreement. Energy
Then in
savings.
10 years,
That's the first step, right, to even see if
yeah, he's got to have the feasibility if we have enough
feasibility.
stuff.
Well, that's what we approached, and that's where Rhonda understands that that's our approach. And there's several reasons for it. The first is, it's not new technology, but it's new technology here,
Yes.
Right.
okay?
Right.
And for that reason, we say, okay, we'll take that operating risk, but that means we also take the debt, all right? So it's a build, operate, transfer. So we build at our expense, we operate at our expense, and then after 10 years of performance, and you see the energy savings, it's transferred over to, the ownership is transferred over to the village.
At what cost?
Well, basically, it's set out in the agreement. So there's a depreciation value, that's ongoing. There's a, marginal value of the facility, but that's basically the start of the agreement. That's what the terminal value is gonna be after 10 years. That's the value.
So it would be proved up by then.
Exactly. And we're on the hook for the debt.
So
you don't have to go back to get another
you're looking for approval from us to move forward with
feasibility.
the feasibility study, so we would have to sign on with you
Right.
with
NMFA,
NMFA.
yeah.
But going back to your slideshow here, biosolids, aerial robotic digestion fundamentals, you have in parentheses here approximately 52% methane, approximately 40% carbon dioxide. And that's everything combined, food waste, is that manure as
That's-
well and
That's the
everything? So
most conservative value, and that's based off of cattle manure.
just cow manure
That was,
right there.
yeah, that's cow manure. We're taking the most conservative values that we've got.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we can hit 68, 65 to
That was gonna
68.
be my next
Yeah,
question. What is the
Yeah,
top limit?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
But I'm for the feasibility study
Yeah.
to move forward that way, to see what we're producing and how, and I do like taking the food waste, because we mentioned about the grocery stores.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I know over at Albertsons, a whole dumpster is filled with fruits and vegetables, rotten food like that, and all they do is they pour Clorox.
Yep.
All on that, and I'm like, wait a minute,
So how would you do that? You have separate receptacles for those things if we started that program? I know you said low-hanging fruit, take what we got now.
Right.
But if it's shown later where we have enough of that, will the feasibility look at any of that?
Corey, you
The
want to,
population in grocery stores?
hey, Corey, you want to talk to that a little bit about what we're proposing at New Mexico Tech, and then the involvement of the students in the EPA P3 proposal?
Sure, yeah, I can try. I mean, I guess what you're talking about, taking food from Albertsons, is sort of what we're working on here at Tech, where we're going to take food, most likely that people have thrown away or maybe leftover food, and using Russ's technology, converting it to biogas. So it's different, but I think it could be applied elsewhere. I mean, it's not going to be exactly the same comparing maybe food waste from a grocery store to food waste from a dining hall, but it'll be much closer than comparing a waste from a wastewater treatment plant to biogas. So I guess my point is that the feasibility study we're doing at Tech, I think, would answer a lot of the same questions of, can we use waste food from Albertsons to fuel a similar facility?
Or restaurants, or I know we produce tons out at the racetrack in the summer.
Oh, wow.
And how would you have to separate it? I mean, you would want to make sure you don't have napkins and stuff like that in there. Because there's an unbelievable amount, and it would just be into, like we've tried to do with, and it just coincides with the Environmental Stewardship Month that we're having.
It does.
Right.
So anyway, that would be something that we could look at in the future, but initially, everything on the feasibility would be geared to, what do we produce now? Will it work with the levels that we have now? And then it would come back to us, and we would make a decision on how much further we want to go.
Right.
And then we'd have to look at either acquisition or space on property already.
Right.
And I'm sure it would have to be vertical integration.
Right. The other thing, I think, Corey, with the proposal of the EPA for the P3 program, it's oriented toward undergraduate students. And undergraduate students have basically become familiar with biogas technology. And one of the, I think, exciting future parts of it is training, young folks from New Mexico about these opportunities in New Mexico.
Absolutely.
Right? And keeping some of these, very talented young people here in the state doing things of importance to the state. So one of the things I personally like to see is some of the students here from the Ruidoso area, Lincoln County, going to Tech, graduating, coming back and having a place, to work and to basically take what they learned at Tech and the classroom and the labs and apply it, in the workplace. So it's kind of building some of these pipelines. So these questions of, for example, segregating waste trash. I mean, Albertsons vegetables, if it's not in a plastic bag, that's really simple. But if it's food that's expiring and it's in a plastic container or some other kind of container, well, you got to separate.
You got to open it.
Exactly, you got to separate it. So it's those kinds of more handling are there really intelligent ways to deal with that?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but where it's already in a stream, it's an issue of a process to collect that material and segregate it from the rest of the stream. That will reduce a lot of the fats, oil, and grease loading on the membrane side. And I think you're gonna see some savings in operational expenses on the membrane side because you shouldn't have the same plugging and other filtration issues, and the need to clean in place as often as you do probably today.
One thing that occurred to me is that we have a separation and collection of cooking oils from all the restaurants at the present time. I don't have a sense of how many gallons of that oil is available.
We don't even know anymore. I don't know who's even picking those up anymore.
Right.
I think it's,
I don't know.
Not Green Tree, but, they come by with the truck and pick it off. It's called Valley Animal Products or.
Like that, yeah.
Yeah, they come by and pick it up. I don't know how much we're getting, and, you know, I know years ago they used to pay me for it, and then I had to turn around and pay them to take it.
Right.
So they're turning into perfume and stuff, you know, that's what he told
You're
me.
looking at a base substrate, there's the end product, or the beginning product, I should say.
Well, Isaac, you think it's worth moving forward, in your opinion, on a feasibility study?
I mean, I'll leave that up to you guys, but, I mean, if we're already doing the solar, might as well do that one project at a time. I mean, that's just my opinion, but I don't know what it would take to do the feasibility study, but, I mean, I'm gonna leave that up to you gentlemen.
Well, I think one doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the other as far as what they do. You know, they're both producing energy for the plant, just different methods. One's collecting it from the sun, the other one's collecting it from the waste that we have. And on days like today, you're still producing energy is the point. And then my big concerns when I talk to our P&M folks, we got legislators that are passing laws right now that they said we don't even have the infrastructure for. And they were already predicting brownouts and stuff this summer.
It's coming up.
And so, you know, I think that, you know, us being more prudent with the people that are in Santa Fe, we know what they're doing. They're already doing it. And so I don't see that these things are going to get any lighter, cheaper, or whatever. So I think we ought to move forward with the feasibility study. What do you need from us, Russ?
Basically, I'll provide an abstract and I'll send it to the Economic Development Department. They send that letter, you know, have obviously authorized by the village, signed off by the council, or by the utility
So we'll need to
board.
take it to this committee and then to the independent councils and
Right.
get approval.
Right, and then they send that over to NMFA, and then I start setting up the application, and it's similar to what was described earlier in terms of a sole source, you know, initially. It's a reimbursement back to the village. The village, you know, issues the PO, and then the work is performed. It goes back to the Environment Department. They sign off on it. Then it goes to NMFA, and the funds are returned to the village.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'd like to see it.
Mayor, board members on the New Mexico Finance Authority on their planning grant, it's a max of $50,000 with I can't remember what the match percentage is. I believe it'll entail also a resolution from both municipalities, so.
Yeah, it is 50,000.
What do you estimate that a feasibility study would cost?
At 50,000 is.
The
yeah.
50,000, the magic number?
Yeah, and we get a preliminary design so that we end up with a product that we can send to engineers and get construction documents.
Okay.
So we don't have a lot of, you know, additional layers in there to, you know, a bunch of people to touch and feel and add expense to it. Because it will be privately funded, you're not gonna have some of the issues that were mentioned earlier when you go through the RFP. Now, we have to, as a private entity, you know, subscribe to the same representation as warranties that if it was public, the Buy American, the steel, prevailing wages, Davis-Bacon, you know, as a private contractor, we've got to make the same reps and warranties that you would have if you went through a public solicitation. But the difference is we're assuming the debt. We're not going back for resolutions to add gross receipt for repayment. So the financing burden is upon us.
Okay. Well, when we get that information, we'll run it through legal and
Yep.
make sure that we've got everything checked on.
Yep.
checked out. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Russ.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, sir.
You know, and it's really a simple process. It sounds highly, I mean, it can be technical, just to balance everything, but, you know, when you think about it in the scheme of things, that that was one of a guy that he's still alive, he's 95, he's got like 65 patents, and his whole goal when he graduated from college, he's one of the ones that developed carbon black from the plants in the Texas Panhandle to go into, with IBM, to make printing. Theodore Dickerson's his name, and he's always looking at a waste stream to convert to a revenue stream. And that's all he looks at in every process, and he's done it in farming, he's done it in manufacturing, stuff that other people are trying to bury, hide, pay somebody to take the death certificate on it. He takes it off their hands, and then until he figures out what he does, how to do it. Because I called him, and at his age, he's still sharp as a tack, and he said, this ain't new. You know, we're doing this in Mississippi right now, and he was telling me all the different places. And so he said, I figured as green as blue as New Mexico is, I figured y'all were doing that already. You know, we're still trying to get recycling down. So anyway, thank you, Russ. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Does any of the board members have anything to report?
No.
Not me.
Okay. All right. Ron, do you have anything?
Mayor, no, not at this time.
All right. Well, that concludes our agenda for today. This meeting is adjourned.
There's a city north of Denver, about 100 miles, and I'm blocking on the name of it, but they use this very process to make the